I'm a board-certified dermatologist, and here are 3 things that I would never use inside in a poorly ventilated area. The first is dry shampoo.
Things I won't buy anymore as a lawyer who tracks all the lawsuits. Beauty edition. First, waterproof mascara.
Here are 3 red flag ingredients in your shampoo. I'm a hairstylist. Sulfates. They're just gonna strip your hair of all its oils, color, everything you need it to do. It's gonna be gone. Don't do it.
Stop using chemical sunscreen, you guys. I honestly think it's better to put nothing on and cover with clothing than to use chemical-based sunscreen.
Every single thing you just heard is wrong.
Hi, I'm a chemist. There is a lot that's incorrect here.
Our society teaches us that a person with a degree or a person in scrubs is automatically an expert. This is leading to an epidemic of misinformation spreading on social media, mostly through short-form content on TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook. But thankfully, we have industry professionals to set the record straight.
If you're new here, I'm Michelle. My PhD was in medicinal chemistry, and I am a massive skincare nerd.
Today, we're talking with Dr. Michelle Wong, who uses her knowledge of chemistry and the beauty industry to debunk misinformation spreading around the internet. Coming up, what are some of the most common topics of misinformation that you see recycled over and over again?
But they can't say free from parabens.
I love that.
There's no legit reason. It's
Why
great.
don't we have that?
And I think doing this sort of detective work that doesn't require a scientific background is just so useful. I will see 10 pieces of misinformation before I have the time to produce like one rebuttal. They go viral because they're simple. They're simple, they grab you, they appeal to your emotions a lot of the time, and science is not that.
I have a very, very exciting interview for you today. As you know, I just finished my series on The Ordinary, and what I like to do, what I want to start doing is taking the inspiration from my Friday videos, from my deep dives, and then doing a compatible interview to go with them. My ingredient guru for many years has been Michelle from LabMuffin Beauty Science. And if you are not familiar, get ready to get familiar. You're going to fall in love with her. She's amazing. Welcome, Michelle.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. I'm so excited. I'm like fangirling a little bit right now. I'm kind of like,
Oh, I am as well. Like, I've watched you for so many years. It's really cool to finally meet.
Yes, to finally meet. We've chatted back and forth through DMs and things for a long time. I know I've asked you multiple questions like, hey, am I on the right track here? When I've tagged you in all the posts that everybody else tags you in. When you see misinformation in skincare, you get tagged a lot when there's somebody that's spreading misinformation, because that's kind of your thing. If people don't know you and they've never seen you before, can you tell them a little bit about your educational background and kind of your specialty?
Yeah, so my background, I did a PhD in chemistry, specifically medicinal and supramolecular chemistry. So medicinal, obviously, well before drugs. So looking at like structures that could potentially become drugs, and supramolecular is like how different molecules interact without actually reacting, which it turns out is really, really relevant to cosmetic chemistry. So I was doing that, and I started looking into buying skincare for myself, and I realized there's all these weird sciencey words that just aren't explained anywhere. This was back in 2011, well before Instagram and social media, really like in the really early days of YouTube. So I couldn't see any information. I started a blog to talk about it, and that just slowly turned into a bigger and bigger thing. So that's my educational background. I also worked at a tutoring center. I was the head chemistry teacher there. So I was like writing the textbooks and training up the other teachers. A lot of the teachers were also chemistry PhD students. The standards were quite high because like if I wrote something bad in the textbook and everyone else had to teach from it, they would all just like get really mad at me. That was kind of like my gauntlet of fire towards becoming a content creator, talking about the science behind beauty products. So these days I debunk a lot of myths. A lot of the time when there is like a viral post about something, people will send it to me and go, okay, can you like fact check this? Is this true? Is this not true? Do I need to check out all these products that are giving me cancer? That kind of thing. So I'm on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube. I also have a website where I write articles. That was where I started.
That's fantastic. And I think that a lot of us really depend on your background knowledge so that we can spread it to our audiences. I know that James Welsh references you quite a bit, and
Love
other
him.
people people, we kind of know that you know what you're talking about. So we'll be like, and then Michelle from LabMuffin Beauty Science said blah, blah, blah. It's really helpful to have a professional in the space. And it's really frustrating when you see these TikToks or these short reels that they may pull on a research article, or they may pull from, like recently, the lawyer that had looked at class action lawsuits and had said, well, because these class action lawsuits are here, that must mean that these things are dangerous. And you see it as a viewer, and then you see I know better, you know better, that that's not necessarily a great way to look at scientific research is through lawsuits. It can get really frustrating when you see comments next to that post and it's all people believing it. So when you see that stuff, what are some of the most common topics of misinformation that you see recycled over and over again? The things that people really are not understanding and misrepresenting?
I think the biggest one that annoys me the most is probably the one about how there's all these ingredients in our products that are killing us. And I guess it hurts me a bit because when I did first start getting into skincare, I was a very budget restricted uni student, and I would spend so much time researching products and before I bought them. And then if someone told me it was giving me cancer, if I didn't know better, I would just chuck it out and all that would be wasted. And I see this all the time still. People will be like, oh no, I just chucked that product out. I wish I came across your video earlier. So yeah, just from that budget point of view, it's really upsetting. And it also contributes to this big atmosphere of distrusting science, because a lot of the time, the products that people fearmonger about, the ingredients they used in mass market brands, and these mass market brands, they invest so much in R&D. They can still keep their products cheap because they have such economy of scale. But I mean, these brands, a lot of the time, they also overlap with the pharmaceutical industry, which has a million problems, but they do also create life-saving drugs, life-saving medications that people often turn away from in favor of alternative medicine. And that leads to lots of deaths. Right now, there's the apple cider vinegar documentary on Netflix that everyone's talking about. That was an Australian wellness influencer promoting her alternative cancer cure. People died from that, literally. Even now with things like measles and polio coming back, possibly, it's just, you wouldn't think that there would be such overlap between beauty and more, I guess, serious topics, but there is. And the fundamental thing with all these topics is really the idea that the dose makes the poison. Anything that you take can be dangerous if you have too much or if you take it in the wrong way. Even water, if you inhale it the wrong way, if you inject it into the wrong place, that is going to kill you. But if you have the right amount in the right way, then that won't. So a lot of these apps that people are using to scan products, and they say, oh, it's got this ingredient, this was linked to ABC, terrible health problems. These links are usually not very realistic. You can't just take that data and immediately go, well, if I put a tiny amount on my skin, that's going to cause that problem. That's just not how it works. A lot of the time, the tests are done in cells, in animals, to find out the pathway. And then later on, that needs to get kind of converted to what happens in a person. And there are toxicologists behind the scenes converting that and making sure that the amounts used in products are safe. If there is a suspected problem, then a lot of the time there will be a government that goes out and does a survey of how much is in each product, common products on the market, and then work out if that's still safe. If it isn't, then there'll be regulatory action, there'll be recalls, there'll be announcements. It's not like this stuff isn't being checked in the background. And I think even now, especially now in the US with the current cuts and stuff, there's so much background stuff that we just don't see and we just take for granted. Anytime you see a food recall, with listeria, there are people in the background, there's been an outbreak, they do so much detective work before that one announcement that we do see, the very tip of the iceberg. It's exactly the same with beauty products. There's all this science going on in the background. We take it for granted that we can buy a product, put it on our bodies, and we will probably not have a really serious health problem. And that is just, we are so blessed to be able to do that, and it's possible that that will no longer happen.
I think the reason why there's a lot of trust for the misinformation is because we know that this topic as consumers is complicated, and we know we don't have the expertise to understand. So when someone presents themselves as an expert, whether they have shown to actually be an expert or not, people tend to believe them because they say they are an expert. And we see that a lot with, there may be, for example, we have Dr. Doris Dalton from Dalton. I'm not sure if you had seen her, where she went on her podcast with another person and was saying how they don't believe it. She doesn't believe in sunscreen. Unless you are going to bake out in the sun, that you don't need sunscreen unless you're going to spend a lot of time. Because she has a doctorate in chiropractic medicine, she has Dr. Doris Dalton as her name, people see that doctor label, they automatically believe her, and that leads to people to misinformation and that trust there. So it's hard as a consumer to know who to believe and who not to believe. Do you have any like tips or suggestions of ways that we can, as consumers, kind of weed out the people that we can trust and the people that we can as far as giving us information?
So it is really tricky. I think the most important thing is to think about who the relevant experts are for any topic. So a lot of the time you'll see things like, you might think that a medical doctor knows everything about health, but there's actually a lot of things they don't know. Like a lot of health stuff is the realm of other scientists, like toxicologists, for example. There is this trend of not just even chiropractors, also medical doctors, just saying things like fragrances have these chemicals in them that will kill you. Usually it's, at the moment, it's phthalates. They have these phthalates in them that are linked to all these health problems. And the thing that they don't realize is that fragrances only contain one phthalate, and that phthalate is a lot safer than the other ones, which are mostly in plastics. But the doctors don't know this because they don't know about what's in fragrances. Like, it's not really within their realm of expertise to work out like emerging health concerns. Like, they know the established science, they apply that in their work. But with this sort of like more preliminary stuff, they don't really have the expertise to assess that. So it's really hard to tease this apart. Jen Novakovic and I, Jen of the EcoWell, we started a social enterprise called Beauty Psycom, where we're trying to disseminate more accurate beauty science. And she made this really neat chart, which has 5 different expertises, and within cosmetics, who is the right person who understands each topic. It'll have like something like, let's say, product safety. So product safety, there's like a big solid line from toxicologists because they are the best people who can talk about that. But there's also little dotted lines from cosmetic chemists and regulators because they also know a bit about that because they need it for their work. And then there's also estheticians and dermatologists on there. They don't have lines towards that because they don't know about that. A lot of the time they will get that wrong because they don't need to interact with that part of, like, I guess, the beauty, the giant web of beauty science to do their work. But then like you'll have other things like skin treatment, dermatologists and estheticians, depending on what type of skin treatment, they'll be the most relevant experts. There's nothing from toxicologists because they never need to interact with that. So I think like for a lot of the world, I kind of wish that there was this kind of chart for everything, because so much of the time you'll see in magazines, in newspapers, they'll just have the wrong expert for something and they'll say something and they'll have basic misunderstandings. Like, there are all these phthalates are not in fragrances. They have zero use in fragrances. There's only one phthalate, and that is not the one that is linked to all these health concerns you're talking about. Just little things like that.
Because people hear something like phthalate, they don't know what that is. So they automatically think phthalate bad. And then they apply that because they think there's only one, because they don't have that background knowledge. And they just kind of apply it to everything. The same thing with like talc, for example. People automatically demonize talc. That talc is this bad thing, but it isn't always. It's only if it's contaminated. So it's like, it gets really complicated, but it's really good to know where to find those relevant experts and knowing who to look at and finding out if it says doctor before their name, what kind of doctor are they? What's their specialty? I think that's such an excellent point.
I should have started with that. Like, the first thing to do is probably check someone's background. Like, are they even who they say they are before you even go into this whole, like, are they a relevant expert? Like, just check if they're like, there's so many people, like even PhDs, who say they're a doctor of something and their doctorate is completely irrelevant. Like, there are people who have a doctorate in like maths and they will say they have expertise in chemistry and they get all the chemistry wrong. And like, you can't tell that if you don't also know some chemistry. So it's really tricky. And this happens all the time. Like, this happens to me all the time in nutrition, actually, because I don't have a background in nutrition. I'll see stuff and they'll say doctor. And now I've gotten smarter and I will check what their doctorate is in. You kind of need, I feel like, people you can trust in different realms. So a lot of the time I will go to Dr. Andrea Love, who she does psychom around like other health issues. And I'm like, hey, what do you think of this person? And then she'll give me like the lowdown on them. I feel like you kind of do need like little nodes of trust because otherwise you're kind of floating in a world. Like, ideally, we would all be able to just look at the arguments and assess them, but no one has the time for that. So we have to use these, like, I guess, newer digital literacy techniques, like things where I think most of us can judge if someone is. It's a lot easier to judge if someone is suspicious or not than if what they're saying is correct or not scientifically, like for anyone, including scientists. There's this method called the SIFT method, which is like whenever you get a piece of scary looking information, the first thing you do is to first stop before you share it, before you take any action, like check out your products. Stop, then investigate the source. So you need to look at who the source is, who is saying this, what their background is, if they have conflicts of interest, that kind of thing. Then find better coverage. So look up the same topic, see if it's been covered by a better source, like a relevant scientist, for example, who is trustworthy. If there's a fact-checking site, maybe like even do a reverse image search if it's like an image. And then you want to trace the claims and quotes and media back to the original context. So sometimes someone will just take a line out of an interview or a line out of an article and then turn that into something else. But then it turns out the next sentence was like giving a lot more nuance, giving a lot of reasons why that thing wasn't actually true in a specific circumstance. And I think doing this sort of detective work that doesn't require a scientific background is just so useful. Half the time when I'm doing my own content, I am relying on these sorts of techniques rather than necessarily looking at the science. Like understanding the science is really important for getting to the truth, but like, I don't know, 70% of it is also just finding the right source and checking if they're a relevant expert, if they're someone you can trust.
Absolutely. And it's so hard these days to figure out who you can trust. And there's so much interest in cosmetic ingredients and there's so much buzz about it. There's so much fear around it. And that's driving sales to certain brands when brands say this ingredient is bad, but we don't use it. You can trust us. Then it demonizes the other brands and builds them up so that they can sell more product. There's so much motivation behind demonizing different ingredients. A brand that brought cosmetic ingredients kind of the forefront and started really putting it on packaging was The Ordinary and Neod and those brands from Decium. I have my own opinions because I did that piece, but how do you feel cosmetic customer awareness of ingredients has changed things? Do you think that it has been a good change, or do you feel like maybe in the end it's better not to know? Like what do you think of that evolution just as a scientist looking at how consumers are now relating to cosmetics and cosmetic ingredients?
I think people were heading towards that direction to begin with, like wanting to know more about their products. And then when The Ordinary launched with like, I think the first big product really that took off was niacinamide. That's a really long, scary word. I didn't know what the hell it was when I first started. And then people wanted to know if they could buy it because they saw this like niacinamide everywhere that was really cheap and they heard good things. So they started digging into it. And I think that had a really good impact on just consumers being more open to science. And I think it also proved to the cosmetic industry that people were interested because before The Ordinary launched, I already had my blog. I'd already been diving into the science behind things for about 5 years. But every time I talked to someone in the kind of content creation industry or within the cosmetics industry about what I was doing, they're like, oh yeah, that's cool. But no one cares about that. Why don't you just stick to, like back then I did a lot of nail art. They were like, just stick to nails. Like, why not just do nails? Why talk about this complex stuff? Like, just talk about how much you love the product. And even when I started doing sponsored posts, I would get that a lot. Like they'd be like, cool that you're trying to explain the ingredients, but can you just talk about how much you love it? Like maybe take this out. It's too hard for people. It is like just misogyny, really. A lot of it is misogyny. A lot of it is just also like a hangover from the times when the only communication was one-page magazine ads or like a 10-second TV spot where they would have to simplify what they were telling people. But then with the internet, like you have infinite space on the internet to talk about your products. Now you have social media, you have brands are trying to post 5 posts a week where they can just need to fill it with content. They can fill it with whatever they want. I think it did really help the industry transition to this space where they were like, okay, we do need to talk more to consumers. We do need to explain. We do need to actually not just expect them to trust us. We want to earn their trust, earn their dollars. And I think that is a really good thing. In terms of for consumers, I think sometimes consumers tend to overthink things. It's really easy because like you have a product and a lot of the time you look at it and you've got the claims on the front, but then like the only thing where you feel like you can, I guess, have a grasp of like the truth is sometimes the ingredient list. Because it's so regulated, it's got technical terms in it, it feels like, the real juice of what you can know about it. But even then, like, it's not designed that way. Like, it's designed to hide what's going on because brands don't want their competitors to just immediately be able to dupe all their technology. I think sometimes consumers overthink things, but at the same time, I do think it is really cool that people care about science now. They're not scared of the word niacinamide. If I say niacinamide, brands aren't telling me, cut that out, just say vitamin B3. I have a lot of appreciation and just like just a fondness for The Ordinary because of that. Of course, lots of brands are also exploiting this by just like science washing. They're really just fake science onto people, trying to make their products sound more scientific when they're not. So I get this really interesting feedback sometimes, which is, why are you talking about these really mid products from like the drugstore, like grocery stores? Like, why are you talking about L'Oreal? We all know that's a mid brand. Why don't you talk about this like smaller brand that has really science forward marketing? And L'Oreal have like full buildings full of scientists working on their products. Like, they invest so much in R&D, they've published peer-reviewed papers, they do proper clinical trials with hundreds of people. They publish that. They invented like EpiSkim, which is one of the big things that is helping people move away from animal testing. But you want me to talk about, but you like somehow consumers, a lot of consumers think this tiny brand that has no scientists full-time is more sciencey than their mid brand. So there's a bit of both, I think. But I do have a lot of fondness for them, for shifting how the cosmetic industry allows me to talk about products, or like allows their influencers, whoever else they sponsor, to talk about products.
And I think that's one thing that Brandon really tried to do with The Ordinary. It was his big FU to the skincare industry. Basically, he saw the products that were so overpriced and very expensive for very basic ingredients. And he didn't understand why they were doing that, because he felt like that was just wrong. Well, he understood why, because it was for profit, but he thought it was really wrong. So he was like, well, I'm going to put hyaluronic acid in a bottle and mix it up and give it to you for $6. So this cream that the major ingredient is hyaluronic acid and it's $50, you don't need that anymore because they're overcharging you, and there's no reason. And it sounds like that's still happening, unfortunately, but I think what you're saying is customers are a little bit more aware, and they know of other things, but at the same time, they're still thinking that a price of a product or a trendy product may be better than a tried and true product that's been around for a long time.
I think on the one hand, I feel like Branda's mentality is sometimes what we're seeing a lot, with people going, oh, why would I get this like expensive hyaluronic acid product when I could get a much cheaper one? And yes, there are tons of products out there that are marked up for no reason. But then there's also like, if you have hyaluronic acid and you just chuck it in a bottle with water, that's not going to do the same thing as like a properly formulated product that has a good delivery system. And sometimes that takes a whole bunch of R&D to get to the point where you can deliver it right. You have the right mix of like different weights of hyaluronic acid. And it's kind of interesting because The Ordinary is also moving towards that more like clinical testing approach. Like, biology is complicated. You can't just go hyaluronic acid is hyaluronic acid, slap it on your skin, it'll do the same thing. We're seeing all this extra clinical testing from The Ordinary. And I think it is cool that The Ordinary is trying to explain that as well, which is nice. So I guess like everyone is going on this journey with The Ordinary, getting into the more complex stuff. So going straight from like 5% niacinamide is 5% niacinamide. Actually, it's a bit more complex than this, and this is why. And I do really love that about The Ordinary. They do seem to be sticking to that ethos. Hopefully they will continue to do that, despite being now part of a much larger conglomerate.
Yes. And like you were saying about like the different molecular weights, I think people underestimate how complex our skin is because it looks so simple to our eye. You look at it and it looks so smooth, and you don't think about it very much, how complex it is and how hard it is for things to get into the skin. And I think it's one thing that I've heard you say before is about people worried about toxic chemicals on their skin going into their body. And if everything seeped into our skin, we would all be dead. It has to have like the molecular weights and all of those things, and can it actually get into the bloodstream? Not everything can, and it's so complicated, and it's so much more than just one ingredient versus another. It's all about the formulation of it. So I think that's where professionals like you come in that explain why this product may be better than this product, even though it's a very similar ingredient. One of the things that you do very, very well is explaining all of the complex things that are difficult for regular everyday consumers to understand. So what do you find as the biggest challenge in getting that science information to customers in a way that they can understand?
That's a really good question. From my training, from my education, like my professional education background, that has helped a lot, because I think that is the hardest thing for most scientists. Like, I think if you just know scientists from social media, you'd think like we're all like really good at explaining things, but 95% of scientists are terrible communicators. That's why like the scientists you see on social media, generally they are the science communicators. They're the ones who have that overlap of like, hopefully they understand the science as well as they're good at communicating. So I think the biggest challenge is really trying to simplify it enough that you still get a chance in the algorithm, because it's always like, the BS that's out there, all the pseudoscience, all the things that go viral that are completely wrong, they go viral because they're simple. They're simple, they grab you, they appeal to your emotions a lot of the time. And science is not that. Most of the time, science is usually slower, it's more complicated. The more interesting the science, the more complicated it is. It's more complicated, which means it takes longer to explain, which means you've got a longer time. I think on Facebook, they say you've got 3 seconds to grab people at the start of your reel, and then they're gone after 3 seconds. So you have to like think of a hook, you have to like force it into a package that people will accept. And a lot of the time, if you're doing stuff like me, I am trying to appeal to people who don't necessarily care about science, or they don't think they care about science, which is always a harder sell as well. Like I need to make it as appealing as the person telling you that, do you have this? Get rid of it. It's giving you cancer. Like, I can't, like, it's so hard to package it that well. I think that's probably the biggest challenge. The other big challenge, I think, is also because cosmetics, there's so many interacting expertises that are relevant. And a lot of questions about cosmetics, they have interactions. Very, very few topics are pure medicinal chemistry, for example. A lot of the time, it'll interact with toxicology, it'll interact with formulation science, it'll interact with maybe dermatology. And trying to get, I don't know, a lot of the time I feel like I'm trying to like get enough expertise in a lot of areas that I'm not an expert in that I can explain it. So there's this whole thing, I'm sure you probably know this as well, like if you want to explain something well, you need to learn it like one level deeper than what you want to explain. So I guess like if I'm answering questions, a lot of the time I am trying to train myself to a deeper level of expertise than I'm explaining. For every video that's like a new field, I have to like learn all this new science, which is really fun, but also really time consuming. And then if you compare that to like the people who spread misinformation, they don't have to do all that. It's so much easier. They can pump out so much more content. And it's always like I will see 10 pieces of misinformation before I have the time to produce like one rebuttal. It's just like the level of output is just not the same, and none of these social media algorithms make it any easier.
Definitely. And it's so easy to just spit out information that triggers an emotion
Hmm.
and that it gets somebody going, because people care about their own health. They may not think they care about the science, but they care about their health. And they have someone that bought their lab coat off of Amazon when they went to Kinko's or whatever and got a little name tag made or whatever. And all of a sudden, oh my gosh, you're going to die because, this product is, it's got talc in it, and talc has asbestos in it, and you're going to get lung cancer. And they're like, oh my gosh, and they're freaking out. Hard to then break through that with the science. Because hold up, slow down. There's science here. And then halfway through the science, they're like glazing over. Like, so it's a really challenging job, but you do it so well. And I really give you so much credit for being able to do that, because I try, and sometimes it's real, real hard, especially when someone's already had an emotional reaction to something they've heard on the internet.
That's why I appreciate people like you and James who aren't necessarily like scientists, but you're the good sources, and you can spread the information and you can spread it in a way that you guys are much better at creating content than I am, I think. Or like content like that talks to people. Like I think it is a big network effect. Like you have the actual research scientists at the top, and then they spread it, maybe more general scientists, and then maybe science communicators, and then that spreads to like regular people. And then so I think it is a really important ecosystem. And that's why I appreciate like science people who are like regular. You're not really regular. Like,
well, yeah, I am.
I
have an education background, so
I tell James this all the time. Like, you are an expert. You're an expert so much more about like what products are out there than a cosmetic chemist. Most cosmetic chemists, there are so many male cosmetic chemists out there who don't know what's going on. They treat it just as a job, and they're an expert in their particular thing. But like I say male because obviously most of the people consuming cosmetics are women. There are, of course, men out there who do a good job of it as well, and male cosmetic chemists. But most cosmetic chemists over the years, especially older ones, it's just a job to them. There's one who I know who uses shampoo on his face. Like, he does not see the difference between shampoo and body wash. He'll formulate it correctly, but he'll be like, nah, like women just like this. I just make it. You are experts as well. And I think this ecosystem is really important. Respecting your all our different places in the ecosystem, that's how we get the good information out there. I was also going to say, one of the things that really annoys me about the misinformation is that, like you said, with the talc and the asbestos, it distracts us from the actual problems. The biggest source of asbestos for everyday life is probably your house. Like there's so many, well, in Australia, like I know my roof, my roof eaves are made of asbestos. If one gets cracked during a storm and it flies down, or if like we start drilling into the roof, well, it's not even my house, it's my apartment block, old and crumbling. Like if it starts breaking down, that's the real source of asbestos, such an important source. But if I'm too distracted, I'm spending all my time trying to make sure I don't have talc in my makeup, that kind of thing, I'm not going to have as much time to remediate my house, or even like things like climate change. Like if you're focusing so much on trying to buy the right products, then you don't have time to think about which politicians have the policies that will actually help. And it's such a distraction because it's a lot harder to make money off which, like, looking up politicians, different policies compared to buy this other product, keep consuming. If you buy this, like, you will be able to save the planet. And that's just not true. Like, there's a reason that we haven't saved the planet yet. It's because the answer is not like tiny brands like getting you to buy new things, big systemic solutions that are trickier. And it's just such a distraction. And it also breeds complacency. There's really interesting research which shows that if people are distracted by these steps, if they've taken a small step, that can actually make them less supportive of systemic solutions because they feel like they've done their part by switching to a reef-safe sunscreen, supporting a carbon tax, for example.
And one thing I was thinking of when you were going through that was benzene and the benzene contaminations in the dry shampoos. When you pump your gas or your petrol into your car, you're getting benzene exposure, correct?
Yeah.
And when you're lighting your gas stove, you're getting benzene exposure,
Yeah.
correct? From what I've read, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that's more than you would get from spraying a contaminated dry shampoo in your hair.
Definitely, like for the average one, like even the most contaminated ones, they are generally like around the same or like even lower than how much you get in your everyday life. And that's like the most contaminated, like the average ones, like most of the ones on those giant lists that Valley Shore put out, they are well below, like they are not important. Like the biggest thing that you can do, most people can do to reduce their benzene exposure is park their car not in a garage attached to your house. Or I guess you could switch to an electric car. That would also help. If you use gasoline in your car, that's like the biggest thing. Another big thing would be stop using a gas stove. Like switch to induction. Induction is actually really great. I got an induction cooktop. I did not believe in it, and it's been very surprising. I'm Asian. I've been brought up with like very strong cooking opinions, and it's surprisingly good.
And a
But
lot of
like
stovetop cooking.
like gas is actually really bad, and there's all these, I don't know about it where you are, but in Australia there is a giant gas lobby that's trying to convince people that gas is the way, like the hazards of gas are not that big, that kind of thing. But it is actually one of the biggest sources of air pollution inside your house. And then you have all these people worrying about like a scented candle, and it's just like the proportionality is just not there.
Right, right. And I think they take that little bit, that little piece of truth,
Mm.
that little grain of truth, and then they blow it up. And then, like you said, it's a distraction. It's a distraction from the real issues that are out there. And another thing you just mentioned was the reef safe sunscreen. When I just went on a vacation, and when you went on this one particular excursion, they said if you don't have reef safe sunscreen, and you can't, like, if you put on not reef safe sunscreen, you can't go in do the excursion. Like, you have to have reef safe sunscreen. And I think a lot of people do believe in that, but I know that there is science against that is really hard to fight, because so many big entities have adopted reef safe sunscreen as that this is the cause for the issues with our oceans is sunscreen, that it's a major contributor, but that's been debunked.
Quite context dependent. So I guess if you are covered in sunscreen and you are literally touching coral, that's not going to be good. But like most of the time, if you're just going near coral, just not a big contributor. Like the bigger contributor is probably like if you step on the coral, if you touch the coral, probably the carbon from your plane getting to your vacation spot. That is going to be a much bigger issue. By far, the biggest cause of coral damage is climate change. There's also things like agricultural runoff, invasive species, like things like that. And then you have all these, this is something I get very, very mad about. There's actually one of the top coral researchers in Australia, like He's on Blue Sky. I think he might still be on Twitter. Like, he just tweets every day about how pissed off he is, because he's like one of the people who has been publishing the big papers on like seeing how the Great Barrier Reef has been declining. Like, he has been around for so long. He has seen it decline. He sees it every year, and it's just like heartbreaking. And then there's all this stuff about how like reef safe sunscreen, plastic straws. There's a story where someone, like some scientists, have grown some coral and we can totally replace the coral. And it's just like not true. It is just climate change is so devastating for coral. And all these like feel good stories, they really are feel good stories. They are people trying to make themselves feel better about it. And that doesn't help. And it's actually counterproductive. That is a massive tangent. You probably want to cut
Oh,
that
no,
out.
no, that's okay, because I think it relates back
Yeah.
because like you were saying about being distracted, when politicians have an agenda or a company has an agenda, they want to produce a product. So they say, okay, if you stop using plastic straws and you start using reef safe sunscreen, like let's talk about that. Let's talk about all of those things. Don't look at how we are damaging the environment with how much water we're using to make our products, or the plastic that we're creating, massive amounts of plastic waste, things that might actually affect the environment. Make people feel good about the little tasks that they're doing, like using a paper straw. And like you said, then they kind of shut off. Well, I use paper straws. I'm good. I don't have to call my politician. I don't have to lobby for things. I don't have to talk on the internet about ways that we can actually influence change, because that would affect their bottom line.
And also, it affects the politicians as well, because if they say, okay, we've just banned like one very small subset of sunscreens, you can still use all these other sunscreens, so it's fine. It's not really fine if your skin is anywhere darker than a shade of paper. But anyway, politicians can claim that they've done something. So it's not just even just corporations. Politicians are also into this, because if they started trying to regulate oil companies, like they are massive donors. They're massive political donors. If they start trying to make noise about these big systemic issues, if they start trying to enact these big changes, then that's going to be a much bigger problem. They're going to lose a lot of funding from that. They are colluding. it is like beneficial for both to make your focus on reef safe sunscreen. I don't really know the right solution to that. I guess like I'm trying to do my part by debunking it. Jen of the EcoWell, she's doing her research, her PhD on environmental misinformation. And like this is always like the thing she ends up back at is we need like top-down solutions from governments. None of these little things are going to make a big dent in it. And also you can't incentivize corporations just from the like free market principles. It has to be top down, because the things that will help are always against profits, against money. And not to go on a big anti-capitalist rant, but the way that our whole economic system is like set up is that if you have more money, you can do more things. Like you have more capital to invest into things, including messaging, including actions that will make a difference.
And it gets really complicated really quickly. And it goes back to what someone's motivation is, and how do you know what someone's motivated by? They're looking at you and they're saying, I care about you. They're very believable. But then you find out later that they were motivated by something else. And then, well, who do I trust? Who can I trust? And that's where that document that you were saying really will come in handy. And I'll make sure I put it on the screen for when I have it, when I edit this. But that kind of thing, I think, is so important to really whittle it down and find those people. I don't know how we get that on a massive scale. Like you're saying, like, I don't know how we fix this. I guess it's just about just continuing to have conversations like this one and spreading it to as many people as we can. So customers can make better choices and know that they're doing something that's really good and not just being manipulated into doing something that benefits someone else.
Exactly.
And so thinking about it on like a deeper level, the future of the skincare industry is so wide open. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know how things are going to go. So if you could, like, thinking about the skincare industry as a whole, if you could make some big changes to the direction of where the skincare industry is going, or just the science in general, what are some of the things that you would do? I know
That's a really good question. I think
you see so much. That's why I want
Yeah.
to know, is because you see so much that maybe the average customer doesn't see.
I think one of the things that I would personally want, that I think is a relatively small, like easy change, is if within companies, their scientists talk to their marketing people more. Like there was more like collaboration there. Because I think in a lot of the big companies, again, this is like my whole thing where like the big companies, they have the money to make changes and that will have a bigger impact. First off, like if they just talked more, because I see so many big companies just shooting themselves in the foot with their marketing. Like did like a little like Google at some point when I was doing a talk about this. But so many big companies who hire thousands of scientists, they have things like paraben free, sulfate free, silicone free on their packaging. And they don't quite realize that people read that and they're not dumb. Like that teaches them. Like if they see a big company saying paraben free, people learn like, oh, parabens must be bad. Why else would they be saying this? Or like sulfates might be bad. And the thing is, so many of these companies that have sulfate free, they have other products that have sulfates. And this is not this is not consistent messaging. And I think it's because like internally they had like a marketing focus group and that did really well. So they didn't see like the big picture of how things play with each other. They were just like, okay, well, we'll have sulfate free on this one product. But that actually educates consumers to avoid that ingredient. So I think that would be nice if they had that. And I think also just then they could also make more compelling marketing as well. I think hopefully I've helped demonstrate to some of these companies that you can make your science compelling. You can have this at the forefront of your marketing. You don't have to resort just having people say, oh, this smells great, which is important still, but they can do more than that because they have so much science that they just keep locked up, that they never share because they're still stuck in that mindset where our customers don't care about science. They just want to see Jessica Alba promote something. I'm so old. No one cares about Jessica Alba anymore.
Yeah, well, she has the Honest Company.
Yeah,
Did she
does,
leave the
yeah.
Honest Company? She might have
It's
left.
not big anymore, is it? It was
I
so
don't
big
know.
like 5 years ago.
It really was.
I don't know. I was trying to think of someone who is cool. I don't know. Chapel Roan.
Yeah. Like
Although she's
right
pretty
now,
cool,
it's
I think she is
Haley
true.
Road Bieber
Oh,
is
yeah,
kind of
yeah.
like in the forefront, and
I guess the other big thing is I think if there was more enforcement of like dishonest marketing, misleading marketing, there are actually laws around it and people successfully sue over these claims. Like I think there was a lawsuit about reef safe sunscreen. And I think without these sorts of like legal repercussions, companies just like they make so much from dodgy marketing that they just keep doing it. So I think if there was more enforcement of that, like in the EU, you cannot say free from something if it's a perfectly safe ingredient unless it's useful for the consumer. So they can say like free from animal ingredients because there are people who are vegan who want to avoid them, but they can't say free from parabens
I love
because
that.
there's no legit reason. It's
Why
great.
don't we have that?
But
I
it's not
want that.
enforced. The thing
Oh, it's
with
not
Europe,
enforced.
the
Oh.
thing with Europe, which I have
Oh.
discovered from European regulators or people who work in regulatory in Europe, they're actually jealous of the US because it's so easy to sue people in the US and it's easy to do like a countrywide recall or easier in the EU because a conglomeration of so many countries. I might be getting this wrong. I'm so sorry for to any regulatory people, but this is hopefully the gist is right. It's just not enforced evenly. So people keep saying European sunscreens are great, but great in France maybe. But like, what about in Estonia? What about in like this other EU country that like Romania, I've heard is like a particularly bad one where like the sunscreens you can't trust any of the claims on the sunscreens. That becomes the big problem. Like enforcement is so spotty because I believe the EU can have a law, but then it's up to individual member states to actually enact the law or implement the law. But it is a really great law, and I wish that was enforced more. And I wish it was in more common in Australia, the US. But I guess in the US, you did have that reef safe sunscreen lawsuit, which made me very happy.
Yeah.
Although, like, I think the conclusion wasn't quite right, but it was just kind of nice to have a
At
small
least
win.
it's something.
Yeah,
At least it's something.
exactly.
Yeah, but that sounds wonderful. Like I would love that. Like because I do think that a lot of people see that free from and they automatically think that means it's bad. Things like silicone.
I think there was a study on GMO free in the context of food, and they did find that people learned from the label. But again, I guess it's the thing where like science is quite siloed. So I don't know if all the science communicators who don't work in food have seen the GMO study, and I don't know if the science communicators or the scientists who aren't science communicators have seen that, and if like the marketing people know about that study. It's all just like,
And
yeah,
it's
it would be
nuts
nice if there was
because
more. Like,
we are so interconnected as a society.
Yes.
We're more interconnected as a society than we've been in the entirety of human history, yet we still can't communicate. Like, what is happening? Why is this? It's terrible. But hopefully we can get ourselves together. And I think that it also you have to have people at the top that are working for the common good.
Mm.
And I think that sometimes that's hard, especially like we were saying, when there's money involved, it's hard to get people to work for the common good.
There's just like so much inside corporations. I guess it's the thing where the bigger the corporation, the more you're like a little cog in the wheel and you don't have as much, you can't have that much influence, which is one thing I do like about smaller brands, because there are smaller brands out there who are science focused and who can do things with their brand.
And they tend to be a little more passionate, the smaller brands too,
Mm.
because they're especially the new ones, they're so excited and they're so pumped up. They're like the first year teacher. Like when I was teaching, like the first year teachers, they come in and they've got all their pencils lined up and everything. And by the end of the first year, you come in the second year and everything's everywhere. The new brands they come in with so much enthusiasm and they're so excited for the things that are happening in their brand. They tend to make some mistakes occasionally, but that enthusiasm really can lead to good things as far as innovation and ingredients and things like that. So speaking of that, consumers need these places where they can get information, because that communication piece, it's hard to know who to believe, where to look, where to go, and besides knowing that chain of people and who the experts are there particular websites or different places that you feel like are very consumer friendly that you would recommend for people to learn more about cosmetic ingredients and what the real science is?
Well, we're trying to make one at beautypsychom.com. We're trying to do that, although like Jen and I are both like super busy. But yeah, I think hopefully that will be a really good resource. So there's the most exciting thing there that we've got is our briefing notes. So whenever there's like a study that comes out that a lot of people are freaking out about, Jen knows a lot of scientists in different areas and she'll get actual experts from those areas to comment. So people who are much more expert than me or Jen, and they'll have their comments there. One who wants to try to explain the science, they can go there and they can immediately see quotes and like detailed analysis from like epidemiologists, toxicologists, these people who generally don't have that much of a platform because their info is so specialized. But people like me or Jen or like you and James, you can go there and you can see what they've said and like literally have the correct information out there. Or even journalists. A lot of journalists tend to always ask dermatologists about toxicology, and sometimes the results are painful. I think that's one thing. I think also just like always like just fact checking. I think I did like a post on red flags, which I should really pin at some point, about red flags in experts. So things like checking what their qualifications are, checking if they're lying about their qualifications, if they talk about their qualifications too much. So if they say like, I don't know, I'm a board certified dermatologist and here are the candles you should be buying. If they say that, that is a red flag. It doesn't mean they're wrong. Maybe they have looked into it and they just say that as a habit or something. Like if they keep on just relying on their like supposed expertise, these are like little red flags that you can look for. Things like if they don't disclose their sponsorships, I think that's a really good sign that someone might not have your best interest at heart. They're like, if they're willing to hide that, maybe they're willing to hide other things to, get more views or whatever. If they've said a lot of incorrect stuff in the past. Obviously, everyone is human. If you're an expert, like you are also human, you will get stuff wrong. I have gotten stuff wrong. But if they get a lot of stuff wrong, then that's probably a good red flag that they're not trying very hard or they're not very good at what they're doing. Maybe they've completely faked their whole life. Who knows? But it's a good red flag to look out for. Like if they talk a lot about, let's say, reef safe sunscreen, which is definitely not true, then you probably can't trust them, at least on like environmental impacts.
Yes, definitely. And I actually got this book and it's really good. It's called The Science of Beauty by Dr. Michelle Wong. And this book I felt like is excellence.
Oh,
So
thank
I
you.
feel like this is a wonderful source for information. And I can't even imagine the amount of work that went into this book. Like I can't, like I have to open this. I'm just going to open to a random page. We got little diagrams there. We have to do a little more like this is like incredible. Like some of these diagrams and the charts, like how in the world are you serious right now? Are you serious right now? It's got every single thing you could possibly want to know. What are the benefits of different hair products? How do I prevent frizz and flyaways? Makeup section, what's in lipstick? Types of foundation. Lengthening mascaras contain tiny nylon or rayon fibers that sticks to the end of lashes. That's how it works. Thing you could possibly want to know about why do my nails look different? I this is just me gushing over this book
Oh,
because
thank
I really
you.
feel like this is like a bible almost of everything you would ever want to know about the science of beauty. And you did a fantastic job on this. And I just admire it so much. Like I'm like I took it with me on vacation and I was flipping through it, and because I kind of flipped through because it's almost like a textbook, so you don't have to read it front to back. You don't have you kind of can, when you're interested in something, you just kind of flip around. So this is a personal recommendation. Do you agree that this is something that people should read?
No, I thought it was trash. No. No, I tried really hard to put like as much like everything into it as I could. Because we made it beautifully illustrated, that's why a lot of it is quite condensed, but I did try to fit everything in as much as I could. That's like the how to analyze like environmental impact. I'm looking at this and I'm getting like a little bit of PTSD about how how annoying some of this stuff was. But I tried really hard to make like accurate diagrams. I refer back to it all the time on my videos, but I think I told people this is like a preview of like the videos that you're going to get for my next 30 years. It's just everything has like all the essential things to take away from like a full 30-minute video. Do I need sun protection if I have darker skin? That is like a full 2 or 3 videos. The fact checking was very difficult. I paid, I think, 6 different scientists to fact check their particular section. Someone with a PhD in hair to check through the hair section, and who has also worked at several hair manufacturers.
Is it available in bookstores?
It should be, and if it's not, you should be able to order it in. Yeah.
Nice. And so people can find this in their local bookstores. I got mine off Amazon. So if you are interested in this book, I will put the link down below. Not affiliated. We have your website link down below. Where else can people find you? Your Lab Muffin everywhere, yes?
Yes, my website, labmuffin.com, YouTube, Instagram, TikTok. I have a Substack newsletter. I do too many things. I should probably cut down. I should probably specialize, but
But that's how you reach so many people is by kind of spreading yourself out there and getting to different audiences. So that's fantastic to be in so many different places, and not to be confused with Michelle Wong, the luxury beauty reviewer. Michelle Wong, the luxury beauty
I
reviewer.
think Michelle Wang, but like Wang
Yes,
is like
Wong.
Wong in like a different dialect. So
Yeah, he pronounces it Wong.
oh
So,
no.
and it's funny because I've spent quite a bit of time with her, and when I've talked to her about you, she says, well, she spells my name the way that you would typically spell it. Like that's the way that because she only spells for Michelle with one L.
Oh, that's exciting. That's a
Yeah,
very
she's like, so she's kind of jealous of the way that you spell your name because it's so much easier for people, even though it's pronounced exactly the same way.
My parents actually added an extra L, I think like a week after I was born, because they were like, oh, actually that's more common.
Wow. Oh, that's so funny. Oh my gosh. Well, I'll tell Michelle that story next time I talk with her. But thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it. I know my audience really appreciates it too. We will definitely keep an eye out for you debunking more misinformation, and you can always tag Michelle if you see misinformation on the internet, on TikTok or on Instagram. Tag her at LabMuffin. I'm going to have everybody overrunning you with all of the tags. If you already see she's been tagged, you don't have to tag her again.
Oh no,
But-
maybe tag me again. I'll probably miss it.
But
if people tag me like 50 times, then I'll probably respond. If they tag me once, I might miss it and not respond. So yeah,
just keep
there is
tagging
a
her and things so that she
voting
can keep
system.
educating people and letting people know when people have got it wrong, so they don't throw away those beauty products, so that they're not afraid of things they don't need to be afraid of. But then if there is a concern, she'll be sure to tell you that too. So thank you again, Michelle, for coming on. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. It was an absolute pleasure.
I'm glad you enjoyed it. All right, bye.